All right. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the drama. My name is Kenneth Ekpeturi, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Kansas. Today, I want to share with you my research and get feedback from you and see how we move from here. So my topic for today is possibilities and limitation of the IMAG dataset for estimating probable maximum precipitation under varying precipitation conditions there. First, what I want to do is to run through my research background and give you a little bit of an intro, and then talk about some of the questions I'm asking in my research and the objectives I hope to achieve there, and then the methodologies I'm adopting, my analysis and results, as well as the findings I have. Then I can get your comment and questions at the end. I hope you enjoy it. So my research motivation was born in 2017 when I changed research focus from mapping urban areas in Nigeria when we were hit by flood there. So we had this huge flood in hit the Makurdi area there, and part of the question I keep asking myself is why didn't we see this coming? What was happening? Why is not why don't we have this kind of preparation ahead of time? And over time, I try to see that we have this problem of rain gauge there. We had about 87 rain gauge, and out of the 87 rain gauge, 27 rain gauge is what we have functioning down there. And then the World Meteorological Organization, which Nigerian hydrological agency is a member, recommends that we have over 1,057 rain gauges to meet up our land area there. So I see the problem we have there. Even if you want to interpolate rain gauges, this is a very limited rain gauge and we'll run into a problem. So I moved to the US and started doing this research in flood. So my big problem there I have to overcome is data. Data scarcity becomes the big problem for one there. You know, it's easier here. You can get the data from USGS and do your research and you're good. But what about regions where we don't have data? How do we do that? So I have to overcome this data gap challenge there, which faced my research there. To help me solve this problem, I started thinking about alternative ways to get data. So we have the shift from ground rain gauge data to satellite there. And I kind of review a lot of literatures and researches that have been done over in the past there using these data set. I come across this IMAG. The NASA, as well as the JAXA, introduced this IMAG in 2014 as a replacement. And if I thought about if I can use this IMAG, I can be able to module flood there using the precipitation. So what do I need to do? I need to use the IMAG, which is a precipitation satellite, to extract precipitation at various intervals, and then I can transform those precipitation to PMP, and then from there I can map flood risk areas and do that at various intervals. Of course, we need to know that, there's been a lot of money spent, budget going on, over $210 billion since 1980s. The US have invested in flood there, and you can see that even across the globe there. So my research basically at the level I have currently is I'm trying to estimate precipitation from IMAG satellite data set, and then I can compute PMP. So think of PMP as hypothetically the maximum depth of precipitation at various durations, say 30 minutes, 1 hour, 24 hours, a month. So if you have those precipitation accumulation or maximum precipitation, then you want to see, okay, at those intervals, which areas will be flooded. So that is the question I hope to, I'm also trying to address. But at this research level here, I'm looking at deriving those PMP and then see how I can evaluate and validate them using fine reference station data set there, which is in NUA. And then I can also see how satellite, IMAGE satellite is in relation to the precipitation regions. Talk about the wet areas, the mid areas, and the dry areas. And if we can get that, I hope to continue using that, calibrate it, and map flood risk areas as well as do flood modeling. So at this point, I'm focusing more on the precipitation and making sure that the satellite is accurate and usable for people there. So the question goes, now why PMP? So we may not be able to have storm events all the time, extreme storm event all the time, but we can compute PMP using long precipitation record here. The IMAGE have inherited length of precipitation data from TRIM, which started in 2000. So we have over 20 years of precipitation data. And from those data, we can compute the maximum accumulated or the maximum precipitation for various intervals there, which I'm seeing. And if we can do that, we can be able to model flood scenarios at different return periods, which is and then we can go ahead to map PMF, which is the probable maximum flood for every watershed we want to do. And then this PMP is very important because engineers find it useful for in consideration of levees, dam, bridges, and others cover consideration. And then also for planning, you know, you can use it to plan, know where will be affected by flood in the coming years and all that. Farmers find it useful. This my tool will also be very useful to the government, you know, in terms of planning there. The pros, or why I'm using the IMAGE, is that the IMAGE has this semi-global coverage of 65 degrees north-south and a spatial grid of 0.1, you know, when you compare to previous satellite, which has about 0.25 grid there, and also a very good temporal resolution of 30 minutes there. Some of the cons there I've seen in my research when I do some reconnaissance of my data is to see a lot of values there. So we have this kind of missing values, and then these data holes need to be interpolated or filled there. They do that using some GPCC data set as well as some other data from other rain gauges there. And then it's also important to know that this data will also need some form of calibration. So my aim of my research is to identify the possibilities and the limitation of the IMAGE, and I'm asking how well does the IMAGE derive PMPs compared with those of station, and then does precipitation variability influence those PMPs? And to do that, I need to compute PMP using those long precipitation records, and then I can validate them against those station there. So my data set, I'm using satellite, the IMAGE, which has a very, like I described earlier, good resolution and others. And my station data set, I'm using the NOAA Atlas 14 PMP, which is the fine reference data. The tools and softwares I use there, because of my time, I will not be able to show some of my code there, but if you're willing to see them later, we can talk more about it. So I use Google Earth Engine Java script, which I built alongside with my friend there, Jim, my lab mate. So we looked at it together there. And then I use R to compute my PMP, do my statistical validation and some plots. I also use ArcGIS Pro to map, to visualize, and to zoom my gauge site there. And I use Python also to look at the holes, to also do some plotting there. So there are a lot of tools there, some softwares I use for my analysis. My study areas, I started looking at the US. At some point, I was trying to also incorporate not just precipitation variabilities, I was also trying to look at topography in terms of the elevations of those places and see how they impact those PMP. But I said to settle at this point, I'm settling with the precipitation variability at the moment there. So I picked out Kansas. We kind of identified 55 rain gauge sites there, which were randomly, just to make sure, and also make sure they fill up the entire area. And then we do those zoning there. I'll talk more about the zoning there and how we have those gauges distributed along those dry, mid, and wet zones there. But we had about pretty good gauges there for the analysis. So my workflow is quite simple. I use the IMAGE, extract those precision record and feed them in Google Earth Engine asset collection there. Then we can define the point and extract the point gives you the last long. So for every 65 degree north-south, the equator of the globe there, you can pick a point and then extract the precipitation record and then load them into R and then compute the PMPs, taking into account of the frequency factors. There's a formula for that. I didn't include that because of the timing. And then we can do a lot of data preparation and then validation there. And I use those metrics. I use root mean square error to see how much error we have. And then, when you compare the satellite as well as the ground data there. And then use relative bias to see where we'll have underestimation and overestimation of my image derived PMP. I use a coefficient correlation to see the relationship between the PMPs, both the satellite derived as well as the ground, and then to see how they compare there, and then also use the residual errors analysis there to see error at the gauge level there. So these are some of my results so far. So if we take a bird's eye view to see do a statewide analysis, so consider Kansas as a giant watershed, and we want to do this analysis there. One thing that is interesting to note that this, at the end of the day, proved not to be the best approach, because here we are not trying. This did not account or take into consideration the questions in terms of precipitation regions that we had there. So, but we see something interesting. We see that when we zone all those gauges, and be it in the dry areas, the wet areas, when we zone those gauges, one thing that we see is that the correlation decreases as the intervals of durations at the x-axis increases there. The correlation decreases there, and this is because the regions is not taken into consideration, and as well as the we talk about the underestimation and the overestimation there. Those things, so the whole lot of factors are playing down there. But it's good to take a look at it and see, okay, if we just have a temporal analysis there where we don't look at the spatial in terms of the location, okay, what do we see? So we also see that the errors were increasing when we aggregate all those gauges. The errors are increases as the root mean square error is increasing, as well as the duration increases, and the bias, there's an underestimation at the lower duration and overestimation at the upper duration. Now we'll take a step downward. We try to zone those areas. We use the precipitation region to zone it. We also use the PMP concentration to zone into dry, mid, and wet zone. And what do we see there? We see that in the one there, which is a dry, we see that at the lower area, the image was fairly consistent with the newer PMP, and then begin to underestimate there. This graph still needs some work. Of course, this work is still waiting to go through peer review, because we need to show the significance between the lines to see if they are statistically significant there. I didn't add those error bars. And then at the mid zone there, we see these underestimation at the lower intervals, and then fairly overestimation at the upper durations there. And then when we look at the wet zones, which is the dry, we see more of underestimation at the lower areas and overestimation at the upper intervals there. In terms of the statistical validation there, we see that the dry areas have have lesser correlations, while correlation was higher at the upper areas there. And then when we look at the root mean square error, we see that the error was much for dry areas and less for wet areas. So telling us that the image kind of do well in wetter areas, and then the bias was more. We talk about bias, we're talking about where we have the overestimation, and the underestimation was more in the wet areas than the dry areas there. And then lastly, I looked at it at the gauge level, which is I call it the warm eye view, trying to see how the error residuals respond to the station PMP. So we'll do that at all the intervals and use those metrics to see what is happening there. And one thing that is we observe there is that as the interval increases, there's more a relationship between the errors and the station PMP, and also the p-values, which the level of significance also increases across those areas. So these have led us into looking at what about when we interpolate the errors using trend, the error surface. what do we see? So this is how the error plays out. Kansas have been known to be this consistent when you see having this precision increase from the west to the east, and so telling us at the lower intervals, which is 1 there, you see that there's really agreement is really not strong. But when you look at the 24-hour intervals there, which is number 6 there, we see that the dry areas have more errors compared to the wet areas. So my current observation of findings is saying that the wetter the location, the better the IMAG satellite PMPs, and the longer the duration precision interval, the lesser the residual error there. And then you can also take note that the best eye view is not a good way to look at this IMAG, and why the derived PMPs are best evaluated at the gauge level there.
Okay, I have to invite you to wrap up here. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting study. Yeah. In the interest of time, let's move on to the next presentation. It's going to be a team presentation. So everyone, a group of students from University of Washington, according to my information. Yeah, okay, they're joining. The team will present their research on mapping the needs and promise for analytics on pandemic-related changes to public usage of major urban parks and outdoor recreational spaces.
Great.
Great.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Shelley Grant, and while Dana is loading up, we're set? Okay, good. I hold a PhD in geography and a certificate in applied biostatistics, and it's been a great pleasure for me to act as project manager on this timely project. We'd like to thank UCGIS, Angela, Diana, for inviting us to speak at this year's 2021 symposium. My team and I are especially honored to have this chance to reflect on the broader significance of what is a 6-month GIS study on pandemic-related changes in urban park usage based on mobile device data, as well as the specific ties between this work and the smart cities approach to evidence-based policymaking. As mentioned in the abstract, we're a 4-member team of postgraduate, professional, and continuing education students. It's a 1-year program in GIS and Spatial Analytics at the University of Washington's combined Department of Geography and College of Built Environments. Today, I'm joined in presenting by Adi Schlussel, BS in Biology and Environmental Studies, who's dealt with the data acquisition and management steps. Emily Cohn, BS in Environmental Studies, led the foundational geoprocessing and geodatabase design steps. And Dana Olson, with a BS in Geosciences, was our cartographer and platform designer. And I developed the data analytics and visualizations to complement Emily's base maps and fill in informational needs for our stakeholder, the Seattle Parks and Recreation Authority. Next slide, please, Dana. Thanks. For the next 13 minutes or so, we will individually detail aspects of our project roles that either exemplified or questioned the Smart Cities agenda. It's a brief agenda. I'll start by reviewing the practical and conceptual motivations and context for this project, finishing with a list of the driving research questions and problems we aim to solve. Then Adi will discuss the data acquisition and wrangling processes. Emily will follow, discussing our strategies for geodatabase design and geoprocessing. And then Dana will lead us with a brief demonstration, speaking to her platform development and the on Experience Builder and the inclusions on insights that I developed for data visualizations. Before we start, we'd like to thank our project sponsors at Esri Olympia office and also our stakeholders, Seattle Parks and Recreation, as well as our instructor faculty at the University of Washington for their ongoing support. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this is the most words you're going to see. So here's the context, multi-scaled themes and questions. The idea for and sponsorship of our student project was developed by 2 members of the 4-person team of senior solutions engineers at the Esri Olympia office that I just mentioned. And our key project beneficiary was actually the pandemic response team manager at the Seattle Parks and Recreation, or SPR as we'll refer to it. And also her municipal governing groups that she was responsible for reporting to. To give you a sense of the urban geography of Seattle Park System, SPR manages over 489 parks comprising 12% of the city's land area. This project was a pilot study focused on estimating the pandemic effects on visits for only one of their 12-size large destination or Tier 1 parks within the system. And so what you see on the left-hand side is some of the broader concerns that we had. The preventative health versus the pandemic urgencies, park usage. Normally people are maintaining their own wellness behaviors and patterns. However, restraints in social distancing and stay-at-home mandates imposed pandemic urgencies that were anomalous and in some ways complicated that preventative health routine. Our work also addressed human mobility studies. I know earlier this year I saw Grant McKenzie speak on that. Also working with applying novel and big data methodologies, business analytics, machine learning, and POI-based studies that many individuals have focused on. And then there are also points about the moral economies of leisure and intense scrutiny of leisure activities. On the bottom, what I have are Seattle Parks and Recreation immediate concerns. And in getting to know their concerns, we soon learned a new complexity to the study. Parks resource management in terms of costs and in terms of allocation of labor. As you recall, the CHAS movement in Seattle required some of the parks staff to be deployed to support small businesses fearing vandalism. There were also confounders such as the social unrest itself in terms of park behavior and usage during the pandemic. Then there are longer-term urban development and long-term concerns that we had to address, with Seattle in the last 5 years being one of the fastest growing urban centers in the U.S. And then, of course, there are the smaller but equally important inherent bias and error that we had to address. So this question, this simple sounding question of what is the estimated pandemic-related change in urban park usage that you see in red on the right, had a number of smaller concerns that we also needed to address in responding to our stakeholders' interests. When is peak activity? What are the evidenced park policy effects, if any? What is the park's reach? And then are there indications of patterns in that use? So I'll let Addie continue on.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. So to answer our many questions about urban park usage, we used monthly aggregated cell phone movement data from a company called SafeGraph. This data is based on points of interest, so you can pick a specific point of interest like a park and gather a lot of data about it. So like how many people visit that space over different periods of time, where those people are coming from, how long they stay in that space, all of those variables that I have listed on this slide here, and many more as well. However, in thinking about this data, it is important to remember that we're talking about numbers of devices rather than numbers of people. So the data is influenced by things like who carries a phone and who doesn't, even how you have your privacy settings set. And it might not represent all demographics equally. It is also important to acknowledge that there can be sampling error involved in the data, especially at smaller geographic scales like the census block group level. For our project, we chose to focus on Seward Park in Seattle, which you can see circled in the map on the right. And we looked at data from 2018 through 2020 so we could compare two theoretically typical years with the COVID experience of 2020. And below there, then you can just see a little flow chart depicting our data acquisition process and the various services and tools that we used in that. And from here, I'll pass things on to Emily, who will speak about our next steps.
Thank you, Addie. So yeah, I received a huge amount of data from her and needed to filter through 14 variables to determine which ones were spatial and mappable. Just a reminder that the data isn't so detailed that you can see where the phone went in the park, only that it visited the park. Also, very few of these data variables were spatial, except for one that displayed which census block group the device originated from. So after narrowing down the variables to the one we wanted to map, I again had to narrow down the way that the data was aggregated. On the screenshot to the left, you can now see that we had 3 years worth of monthly data that accounted for a few thousand census block groups. And due to the sheer size of the data, we decided to average the pre-COVID years, which were 2018 and 2019, to condense it, as well as to create somewhat of a control year to compare 2022. So from there, I again aggregated further into 3-month seasonal increments. However, I had to remember to treat these values as number of devices, not number of visits, as Addie said. So instead of adding the device values for a census block group from each month in a season, we felt it would be more accurate to calculate the maximum number of devices for that census block group. This is because the 3 devices that went to Seward Park in January from census block group X are probably the same 3 devices that went in February. So when I mapped the seasonal data, it was obvious the maps did little to define the change that occurred from pre-COVID years to 2020, because the maps were simply displaying the total number of devices and the trend wasn't easily readable. So once again, I pivoted and decided to calculate the raw change in values from seasons in pre-COVID years to 2020. This resulted in the data you see on the right. These numbers display the positive and negative change in devices that visited Seward Park in pre-COVID seasons compared to 2020 seasons from each census block group that SafeGraph had data for. So as I've discussed, I faced many obstacles in this process, including maintaining accuracy, dealing with too many maps, difficulty in deciphering trends, and also treating the data as number of devices, not number of visits. And I believe that once Seattle Parks and Recreation will work with this data, they might do so differently than I did, since they will have more time and more resources to work with finer detailed data. We also focus on the change that occurred related to COVID, whereas the department might also have a focus, a separate focus, which would impact the way they aggregate, if they do at all. Next slide, please. And during the process of aggregation, I went through many, many map versions. Essentially, all of them use the same process that you see in the model builder, which was pretty simple. I joined the aggregated SafeGraph data tables with census block polygons and used graduated symbology to display the values. So what you see in that map is that's the final fall map, which is 1 out of 3 maps I made in ArcPro. These delta values are displayed using a graduated color scheme where the dark orange represents the most negative change, light yellow represents no change, and the darkest green represents the most positive change. Something to note, the range is quite small. It's from -10 to +10. You might have expected to see it change by the dozens, but rather remember that the spatial units are census block groups, which are relatively small areas with relatively few people living within them. And the map and the data would look a lot different if it were scaled to areas like neighborhoods. And I should also note that SafeGraph data did not include every census block group in King County, so the block groups with null data are represented in gray. So once I completed the maps, I uploaded them to Arc Online and passed them off to Dana, who will discuss our web app platform.
Thanks, Emily. So my first task was to finalize the map to what you see on the screen. And then my next my next act was to find a good platform to show it on to our stakeholders. My past experience with working with State Park did help us out in how we can present the data. Because we would be presenting the data to a wide audience that needs quick decision making, it's essential to present it in a way to understand but effortless to use for the masses that may not have any GIS background at all. And this is why I picked Experience Builder to present the maps in Insight statistical cards. It was not only quite easy to use, but also has a lot of variety and flexibility to make the platform as needed to showcase the data. And I will change my screen real quick to, there we are. And then this is the final product. So I made a page for each map. So we had spring, summer, now fall. And you can kind of see that there is quite a few differences. And right away, like for example, this plot here, there's about 3 to 4 differences, 3 to 4 change. But in the summer, that same plot, same census block, was a -4 to -3 change. And then I also put in a bookmark, so if someone gets lost, they can easily go back to the center, which is Seward Park. And then I will hand it off to Shelley to explain these Insight tabs.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I completed data visualizations and spatial analytics to complement Emily's base maps. that provided a quick snapshot view of pandemic-related change. I instead wanted to support some of the discrete informational needs of Seattle Parks and Recreation authorities as they were trying to address these complexities of now recovery from pandemic-related slowdowns and then staff diversions. So I used the Esri Insights workbench and tools to make this targeted data on park usage readily accessible for internal program evaluation and planning needs. Dana's just clicking on some samples of essentially what are data description graphics that some of them don't really contain analytics, but like the Experience Builder platform itself, support ease of use, contain quantitative information and clear visuals with high levels of tailorable content. So instead of having large data sets, using smaller, flexible, replaceable data sets. I also completed a suite of analytics, including spatial cluster analyses using k-means, unsupervised machine learning algorithms, aggregated overlays per month pandemic caseloads with park visits per census block group, and also categorical drive time zone layer work. And I just want to make 3 points about how I aim to serve the project ethics through sort of measured interpretations and standardized sort of analytical processes, although using this dynamic and flexible platform. So I took kind of an approach of confirmatory studies. The parks seem to know who is coming when, but instead of taking an exploratory or predictive methodology, I tried to maintain transparency through rigorous methodology. And then I also wanted to address the specific information needs. I think we're close to the end, so Dana, you can move on to the end and I'll quickly conclude.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, we probably don't have time.
Fine, okay.
But yeah, it's super interesting. What a nice teamwork. And it hit a lot of topics that were really heavily discussed today and yesterday. I'm sure the audience probably have a lot of questions to ask you, to discuss with you. Maybe try to make use of the coffee hours, happy hours to chat. I personally have questions too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Xiaojing from Temple University.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you. Just to save time, I'm not going to read your title, so please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, give me a second. I think I need enable that.
Yeah, you can share. You don't need me to enable anything. Oh, we lost Xiaojing. Xiaojiang. Are you still here, Xiaojiang?
Xiaosheng, so you have left the speaker visual, so just click on the share video and audio button once more and I'll let you back in. Xiaosheng.
It's probably the internet connection. Maybe let's give him,
yeah. Here
he is.
Okay. So it's the second button from the right to share your screen. Did you see it at the bottom of your screen?
Yep. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Can you see my slide as well?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. Because of the security issue, I need to enable that. So, yep. Can I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Xiaojiang Li. I'm an assistant professor at Temple University. And today I'm going to talk about some of my recent work, especially after I joined Temple 2 years ago. It's about urban heat exposure in U.S. cities. So hopefully my project will bring some coolness to some of you who are experienced or just experienced extreme heat wave this week. So we all know that urban area usually hotter than the suburban area because, a lot of impervious surface, human heat. So that would bring huge heat threat to human well-being. So in the context of global warming, and many cities are going to experience more and more extreme heat even in future. So we may think about lots of measures to tackle this challenge, like we can reduce carbon dioxide emission, we can increase tree canopy cover, but a lot of these measures take quite a long time, maybe 10 or even longer, 10 years or even longer. So, but in order to solve the issue, we need to think about how does the urban heat actually distribute in our city, and how different people are actually exposed to that. So we usually use the land surface temperature derived from thermal image. So for example, this one is land surface temperature derived from land size thermal imagery. So you can see the distribution of land surface temperature. But here's a big issue for using the land surface temperature in our research. So for example, just land surface temperature only represents the temperature on the building roof or on top of tree canopies. I assume most of you guys probably not live on the building roof or not work on the top of tree canopy. So why should we use the land surface temperature to represent human heat stress? So this method is just not right for indicating human actual heat exposure. So let's just do some little bit of literature review about human heat stress or heat metrics. So land surface temperature, I just introduced about that. Another metrics we probably very familiar with that is air temperature. Like you get the updates about weather information. You may get the information about air temperature, but human thermal comfort or heat stress is not just impacted by air temperature, but also by some other factors like humidity, shade, wind speed. So air temperature is not enough. So, well, we may think about using MRT, which is short for mean radiant temperature. So it kind of metrics that consider the total radiation human exposed. The radiation could be direct solar radiation. Like for example, if you're standing directly exposed by sunlight, you are directly exposed to that direct solar radiation. Some of the radiation could be from reflected solar radiation from other like building or glass or some other walls. It could be also the long wave radiation just radiated by the ground impervious surface or some other types of surface. So the mean radiant temperature has been proved to be much more relevant to human heat-related morbidity or mortality. So, but there are some existing tools for us to calculate the mean radiant temperature. So, for example, the Raman model is a very model that can help you to calculate the mean radiant temperature using the hemispherical image, just like the hemispherical image or the building height model. We can also use the NVMAT, which is a commercial software. It's based on computational fluid dynamic, which is CFD. It can simulate the wind fluid, the temperature, but it's really very computationally intensive. It's really, really very slow and it's not free. So at the bottom did another open source tool called SOWIC model. They're kind of QGIS plugin. You can use that tool and using the building height model or tree canopy height model to simulate the obstruction of trees or buildings. So it's open sourced, but it's still very slow and not really very flexible for people to use. So in this project, I customized and redeveloped that project and redeveloped that software in this project. So basically, it's using several inputs, like for example, tree canopy height model and the building height model, and also the land covering information. So using these 3D models of urban form, we can calculate the scavenging factor, the shadow distribution, the aspects, the wall heights, and many other urban geometries. So rather than not just considering the urban geometry, it also considers some meteorological data like air temperature, humidity, pressure. So with all these parameters considered, we can calculate the mean radiant temperature distribution just like this. So in order to do that, you need to calculate scavenging factor, which is kind of metric to represent the enclosedness of the street canyon. So basically, it means the percentage of solar radiation can reach the ground from the upper hemisphere. If the scavenging factor value is 1, that means the street is totally open. If 0, that means no radiation can reach the ground. So there are several methods to calculate that. For example, we can use ray tracing method, just radiates light to different directions and calculate that using the formula. We can also use the shadow casting algorithm. This method is proposed by my former supervisor when I was doing postdoc research at MIT Sensible City Lab, Colorado. He proposed a method. It helps increase the efficiency, but it is still very slow. So I propose a new method, which is based on GPU accelerated method. So this kind of the conceptual model for the GPU accelerated method, the paper actually just accepted this morning. So it just show you about the two methods, ray tracing algorithm and shadow casting algorithm. If you use CPU, you just regular computer, you may have 4 cores or 8 cores, a very limited number of cores, and each core can only process 1 pixel at once. So also the CPU, the cores are more advanced and faster, but it's really very slow generally if you use your CPU to do the modeling. But using GPU, because it has quite a lot of computational units, we call that cores. So you can use 1 core to process 1 pixel at once because the structure is really very suitable for this kind of operation. It makes your computation much, much faster. So I just show you some results. So for example, the blue line here represents the time consumption for using the CPU, the general CPU method. So here the green line and the yellow line, they're just the GPU-based method. So I'm not kidding, the GPU-based method can be more than 400,000 times faster than the CPU-based algorithm in this modeling. So it just dramatically. So you may think a GPU is just very advanced or very expensive. Not really. Actually, I self-funded myself and spent a couple $100 to buy a kind of low-end and used GPU and put that on my computer. So it has been proved it worked. It works pretty good. And it helped me to reduce the time consumption quite a lot. And also it helped me to lower my electricity bill. So here, if you want to use a method for city scale research, you probably need to chop the large raster data into a lot of small tiles, just like what I did in this case. So here I chopped into cells of 2000 by 2000. And for each cell, when I get the result, I combine them together. So here the example about the spatial temperature distribution map I generated for Boston. So you can see because method is really, really very fast, so you can generate the mean radiant temperature distribution in real time. So you may want to know, what the average, what the general distribution of heat distribution in the city. So therefore, I select 1 month, usually, the hottest months like July or June, and select the hottest hours from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and aggregate them together. So just show you about that here. This is by aggregating the whole month of July. Each day I calculate by 5 hours from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So here the aggregated mean radiant temperature distribution in Philadelphia. You can see, just show you some typical area, like for example, here the distribution of that lower, the dark color represents lower temperature. The lighter color represents higher temperature. You can easily see the distribution of that. I further developed for other cities, so maybe I can just show you about that project. It's called Urban Heat Exposure. So if you just go to my personal website and find my first project, so here is the project I developed. So if I want to check the radiant temperature in Temple, I can just check Temple. So here you can see the Temple. If I want to go to Boston, maybe just type in Boston. Here we go, and you can see the distribution of Boston. You can see the downtown area, because a lot of high-rise buildings, you can have a lot of shadow. I also created certain other cities. If you like, you can check them on that. So let me go back to my slide. So just for different cities, so see the projects. If you're interested, you can go and explore the website for more detailed information about that. So in order to make the pixel level mean radiant temperature maps comparable with socioeconomic variables, we need to do some zonal statistics. So for example, here, the highlights polygon is just one polygon, one sensor tracks in Philadelphia. And I overlay the sensor tracks map on the mean radiant temperature map and also mask out the building footprints because, the temperature on top of the building doesn't represent human heat stress or human heat exposure. Why should we consider the temperature over there? So I just mask off them and generate the sensor tracks level map. So here you can see the sensor tracks level distribution of the mean radiant temperature in Philadelphia. So you may be interested what impacts the mean radiant temperature. So for example, in this case, I compared the mean radiant temperature distribution with some other landscape features. So for example, here the correlation between MRT and the percentage of tree canopy cover. You can see they kind of very significant, strong negative correlation. That means lower temperature, those areas with more tree canopies have lower temperature. And also the canopy height matters. Usually the higher tree canopies have kind of negative and significant correlation with the mean radiant temperature. So here the impervious surface and a kind of positive, more impervious surface, that means the temperature is higher. And here is the building height because high-rise buildings will provide some shade. I further compare with socioeconomic variables. So here is the correlation analysis. You can see per capita income had kind of negative and significant correlation with mean radiant temperature. That means people with higher per capita income usually had kind of significant and lower mean radiant temperature in that neighborhood. And education variable, for people with higher high school degree, kind of positive, and with bachelor, it kind of negative and significant. So for the race and ethnicity variables, the proportion of non-Hispanic white had a negative correlation. Hispanic had kind of positive and significant. Other race and ethnicity variables have no significance. Older people have negative, and younger people, younger than 18, have kind of positive and significant. So I further do some regression analysis and compare controlling the spatial or the correlation and also some other variables. So that the per capita income still have kind of significant and negative association with the mean radiant temperature. And people with the proportion of people older than 65 years old have kind of negative and significant association with the mean radiant temperature. So here is the conclusion. In this project, I propose to use GPU accelerated method for urban microclimate modeling. You can simulate the mean radiant temperature in real time at minute level. So it's super fast, it's very suitable for large scale, and the method is generalizable and scalable. So second, I generate the finest spatial distribution of mean radiant temperature in the US. It can be used for many other cities as well because it's my independent work. So I don't have much time to do for other cities. So I only showed the 14 largest cities in US. So for tree canopy cover had kind of negative, it helped to reduce the heat exposure, and the height of tree canopies and height of buildings also matters. So finally, about just for Philadelphia, there's no significant disparity in terms of all-store heat exposure across different racial and ethnic groups in Philadelphia. Generally, the older people tend to be who are actually more vulnerable to extreme heat. They are living in neighborhood with lower heat exposure. It's kind of good for them. And people with higher income tend to live in more similarly comfortable or lower mean radiant temperature neighborhood. So this is just for Philadelphia. I'm going to do for other cities in future. Thank you for your attention in my project. I would thank Tempo High Performance Computer because always very busy to wait, but I use a lot of that resource. I would also like to thank Microsoft AI for Earth grant. I ran some of the city on Microsoft Azure platform. If you want interested in my project, follow my Twitter or go to my website, check more information about that. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Xiaojiang. I think there is a question in chat. Could you just type? We don't have time to answer now. It's basically asking about the Heat Expo website.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if you can respond in the chat, that would be great.
Yeah, okay.
Yue, our next presentation is by Yue Ling from the Ohio State University. Yeah, Yue is already here.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen.
Are you sharing or?
Yeah.
Xiaojiang, could you please sharing?
Oh yeah, here we go. I saw that.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Okay, am I sharing my screen?
You are, yes.
Okay, yeah. So hello everyone. So my name is Yue Lin. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Geography at the Ohio State University. So today I'm here to talk about one of our recent works. In this work, we focus on how to effectively extract the mobility information from an open geospatial data source, the real-time traffic camera feeds. We explore the use of a quad-tree method to extract the high accuracy regions for vehicle identification in traffic images. And these identified regions are then used to enhance the traffic density estimation. The proposed method is applied to the traffic camera data in Central Ohio, and it demonstrates very promising results. Mobility data are very important for us to understand the characteristics of human movement behaviors. A traditional method to collect mobility data is through household travel surveys. However, this is very time-consuming and only covers a very limited sample. In recent years, we have seen the rise of personal devices and location-aware technologies. We tag our locations on social media platforms. We carry our mobile phones everywhere, not only to keep in touch, but also to navigate. These altogether contribute to the emergence of mobility big data. We can perceive mobility big data as big data plus locational information. With mobility big data, we are now able to collect large-scale mobility data sets in a much more convenient and affordable manner. Today, mobility big data mostly come from 4 sources listed here. They are call detail records, mobile apps, smart cards, and geotag social media. However, there are many concerns in data transparency and reproducibility because limited information is provided about the production of these data. When we're using these data sets, we actually don't know whether there are any errors, inconsistencies, or biases in the raw user traces. We know that algorithms are heavily involved in data retrieval and processing, but we have little knowledge about how they're implemented. So it is not clear whether they will introduce any errors or biases to the data, and whether they'll work well enough to protect the privacies of the data subjects. So if we further apply such data to decision-making, the unreliable data will impair the credibility of the decision output. To address the issues of existing mobility data sets, we explore a new source of open big data, the traffic camera feeds. We use traffic camera feeds because they have several advantages. First, compared to existing mobility big data, traffic camera feeds are typically accessible to the public. We can easily find them on state DOT's websites. For instance, the 2 examples here were pulled from Arizona and Oregon's DOT's websites. Also, traffic camera feeds are attached with many useful metadata such as camera locations and image timestamps. We will know it if there is something going wrong, like there are some missing data. The third advantage of traffic camera feeds is that they are generated in real time. So if we look at these 2 examples, the camera feeds can be either images or videos. In North America, the traffic camera feeds are mostly images, but they are typically updated in seconds or minutes, so they can be considered real time. Therefore, compared to other open big data sources like satellite images, traffic camera feeds have very high temporal resolutions. Lastly, the traffic cameras have a very wide coverage in North America compared to other traffic detectors. More than 25,000 cameras have been installed in over 200 cities in the United States already. Because of all these advantages of traffic camera feeds, many vehicle detection models have been developed to extract the mobility information using such data. The deep learning techniques are widely used in recent years, and models such as YOLO and RetinaNet have demonstrated very promising results in this field. However, we should also mention that existing vehicle detection models still have some limitations. Their accuracy varies significantly among different camera configurations and environments, especially for vehicles that appear to be very small on the images. If we look at these two examples, we'll find that vehicles close to the cameras generally have a higher level of detail, and they can be accurately detected by the models. But for the small-sized vehicles that are far from the cameras, there is a lack of detailed vehicle features for the models to recognize the vehicles. So these vehicles tend to be missed by the models. This limitation of existing vehicle detection models can lead to significant errors in the estimation of other road traffic metrics like traffic density. So in this study, our goal is to address this issue and to obtain accurate traffic estimates from the camera feeds. The procedure to produce accurate mobility measure from camera images, we focus on a subset of pixels in images where vehicles can be correctly detected. We call these areas the hair, which means high accuracy identification regions. We use the quad-tree image segmentation algorithm to identify the hair. In this process, we keep partitioning the image into quadrants until the vehicle detection accuracy of a quadrant reaches the threshold. The quadrants that do not reach the accuracy threshold will be further decomposed until the user-defined maximum level is reached. The quadrants at the level of at all levels of division with the detection accuracy higher than the threshold will collectively form the hair. In this way, we can obtain the hair for a camera. So here's an example to demonstrate a hair extraction process. In this example, we set the accuracy threshold to 0.75 and the maximum depth to 3. For the original image extent, the accuracy of vehicle identification is 0.72, which is below the threshold. Therefore, we decide to subdivide the image into 4 equal quadrants. We calculate the accuracy of vehicle detection for each quadrant and then find that 3 of them now have the accuracy of 1, which is above our threshold. Therefore, these 3 quadrants are added to the hair. The above process will continue until we reach the maximum depth of 3. Although we can easily obtain the hair for a camera using the above procedure, we should also mention that some parameters of the model will affect the robustness of the hair we obtain. These parameters include the maximum quad-tree depth we set and the numbers of annotated images we use to extract the hair. To obtain the robust hair, we adopt a resampling approach to find the suitable parameter values that minimize the difference between the derived hair and an ideal hair. To demonstrate the potential application of this method, we designed a case study using the images from traffic cameras in Central Ohio. There are a total of 249 cameras in these areas, and we only use real-time images from 6 of these cameras for this study. As we can see from this figure, the selected cameras cover different locations and camera configurations, such as mounting heights and resolutions. So using the data in Central Ohio, we designed an experiment to estimate the traffic density from this image using our proposed algorithm. First, we apply a deep learning model called Efficient DAT to detect the vehicles in the image. The Efficient DAT is a state-of-the-art object detector that has demonstrated very high accuracy in multiple benchmark image datasets such as COCO. Then the proposed quad-tree algorithm is employed to identify the hair for each of the selected cameras. We test the impact of different numbers of images and subdivision depths on the robustness of the hair and determine as parameter values for a hair extraction. In the last step, we georeference the road section within the hair and then calculate their lengths. The traffic density is estimated based on the traffic counts and road lengths within the hair. Experimental results are presented below. So first, we extract the hair for the selected cameras using the quad-tree procedure. We use the resampling method to calculate the model errors and to fine-tune the model parameters. As we can see from this figure, when we increase the number of images and the quad-tree depths, the model errors converge, and we will select the parameters when the model errors converge. In the second part of our experiments, we evaluate the accuracy of the proposed method. Results show that the accuracy of vehicle detection is 49% higher compared to the within the hair, compared to the accuracy in the entire image extent. And using the hair, there is an 88% increase in accuracy for traffic density estimation. So to summarize this presentation in this study, we developed a quad-tree-based approach to identify the image subregions with high vehicle detection accuracy. This algorithm is useful to promote the accuracy of road traffic metrics derived from the camera images. It is also independent of the object detection model we choose, so we can actually plug in any vehicle detection models. More importantly, based on our experiments, these algorithms can be used to deal with cameras at varying camera configurations, such as heights and resolutions. So a broader impact of this study is that it can facilitate the use of publicly available traffic images for accurate mobility measurement in a very convenient way. Additionally, it can also help provide a new data source for transportation research and applications that is more shareable and reproducible. In the future, we are going to extend this work from two directions. First, we'll increase the automation of this method to better adapt it to the application on pan-tilt-zoom cameras. As we can see from this example, the angles and zooming levels of pan-tilt-zoom cameras are not fixed, and this makes them very difficult to deal with. We plan to make use of additional LiDAR and remote sensing data to solve this problem. Second, in human mobility estimation, a more common measure is the OD matrix. We'll try to develop a model to link our road traffic metrics with the OD matrix. This will facilitate our understanding of human mobility from the camera feeds. So that's all I have today. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Yue. For the first time in the session, we actually have a little bit of time for questions. Everyone, do you have any question? By the way, Yue is a doctoral student at the Ohio State University, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Until Tom joins us, we know we do have time. So if you have any question, while waiting, I do have a quick question. It's really nicely done. I like it a lot. Quad-tree was used for image compression and so forth, and now you're making use of it in a very creative way. My question was about the final model parameter estimation. You use kind of training data and trying to point to decide the optimal parameters, right? So when you do so, do you think the result will be sensitive to the images you choose? Will the same set of parameters be applicable to other images? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so actually when we are choosing the development data sets, we try to select the images with evenly distributed vehicles. So we make sure that the vehicles won't cluster in one areas of the image. So so when we are, to select the parameters to decide what parameter values we are going to use, we use a subsampling procedure. So we just subdivide the data set we have, like randomly, repeatedly, and then we calculate and then we divide the data set into two sets, right? One is the development data set and another one is the test data set. So we use the development data set to construct the hair, and we use the test data set to calculate the errors introduced by hair. And then we will, so we will completely calculate the errors and then use a diagnostic statistics to actually compute the overall error introduced by the hair. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
How many images in total did you use for the project?
So so actually we reduced the image the sample size from like 100 to 10, and we find that when the sample size is 50, and even if we keep increasing the sample size, the results won't get any better. So based on our experiments, when the sample size is 50, then it's probably enough. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. Thank you very much, Yue.
Thank you.
All right. Let's move on to Jingwu Park. And Jingwu is a doctoral student at the Texas and A&M University. again, to save time, I'm not going to read his title. His title is right there. Go ahead.
You see my screen, right?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. This is Jun Park from Texas A&M University. So today I'm going to talk about the measuring spatial accessibility to intensive care unit beds, which is known as the ICU beds, under the uncertainty of supply and mobility. So before we dive into the main study, let me briefly introduce what spatial accessibility is for those who are not familiar with this topic. So spatial accessibility is defined as the ease of access from a particular region to an infrastructure of interest. And it is measured by the interaction of supply, demand, and mobility. And as a result, spatial accessibility usually provides the improved understanding of two aspects. The first aspect is that it explains the inequality of accessibility across the study area. And for the second aspect, it can propose where additional resources should be placed. So please take a look at the map on the right-hand side. So this map shows the spatial accessibility to healthcare resources in Chicago region. And the darker color here indicates the higher accessibility, and the lighter color indicates the insufficient accessibility. So as you can see through this map here, there's a spatial disparity of access. And in order to address those spatial accessibility, we can propose this type of location needs to have additional resources. So thanks to the significant policy implication, it has been applied for various urban infrastructures, such as healthcare resources, job opportunities, or food outlets. So the motivation of my study here came from the limitation of the conventional approach, which assumes the full capacity of supply and the no interference on the mobility. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, it is measured by the interaction of supply, demand, and mobility. And a lot of researchers just assume those variables are static and deterministic. However, in reality, both variable possesses uncertainties. So, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, most of hospitals in the United States were suffering from the limited availability of their ICU beds. And the plot on the left-hand side showing the number of ICU beds in use from May 2020 to March 2021. So as you can see in this plot, after the pandemic started, there's a very limited number of available beds. So in addition to the supply, so uncertainty in supply here, so the mobility is always uncertain, given that it does not guarantee the on-time arrival. And also the estimated travel time varies within a day over 24 hours. So therefore, I focused on how these uncertainty impacts the measure of spatial accessibility. And I specify the research question as shown in this slide. So the first, does the various level of reliability affects the patterns of spatial accessibility? And second, how does the stochastic distribution of accessibility spatially cluster the regions and delineate the location of robust accessibility? Third, is the robust accessibility related to the case fatality ratio of COVID-19? So in order to explain the impact of uncertainties on the measures, let me start with explaining the conventional method for measuring spatial accessibility, which is the two-step floating catchment area method here. So as its name explains, the method consists of two steps. And the first step is to calculate the supply to demand ratio of each supply facilities. And let's assume that there's two physicians and only one person live in each hexagon in this area. So for the physician location A, let's say there are 16 hexagons can reach to the supply location within a certain threshold travel time. So therefore, the local supply to demand ratio of physician A is 1/16. In the meantime, if people living in 17 hexagons can access to the physician B within a certain threshold travel time, the local supply to demand ratio of physician B is going to be 1/17. So for the second step, the method sums up the local supply to demand ratio for each demand location. So in this example, there are 3 hexagons have overlaid catchment area, so that the accessibility of these 3 hexagons is the sum of 1/16 and 1/17. So as I mentioned in the introduction, so both supply and mobility has uncertainty in it. And so let me briefly explain the impact of uncertainty on the measures of spatial accessibility. So for the uncertainty of supply can either increase or decrease the supply to demand ratio of each supply location. So if the availability of physician A increases, it enhances the local supply to demand ratio of the entire location in this catchment area. And on the other hand, if the availability of option B decreases, it lowers the overall supply to demand ratio in this catchment area as well. So in the meantime, the uncertainty of mobility can change the shape and the size of the catchment area. So like this or like this. So as the catchment area changes, the location with the higher accessibility changes accordingly. So in order to address those two uncertainty in supply and mobility, we take intensive care unit beds in the greater Houston area as a case study. So to measure the spatial accessibility, we utilize the hospital equipped with ICU beds as a supply, residential population as a demand, and the travel time from the demand location to the supply location as a mobility. So for the stochastic distribution of supply, we utilize the historical ICU bed usage data from May 2020 to September 2020, and then we calculated the probability that hospital in each county have a certain degree of availability. So for example, Harris County has a 17% chance of having 20% of availability, and it has 60% chance of having 40% of availability. So in the meantime, for the stochastic distribution of the mobility, we employed the historical travel time data of the highways in the study area. And then we calculated the percentage of the each road segment has a certain ratio of the travel time compared with the free flow. So for example, road A will have 21% of having 25% of the free flow, something like that. So as I mentioned before, the uncertainties in supply and mobility can cause the variation of the supply to demand ratio and the size of the catchment area, size and the shape of the catchment area here. So in order to address those two uncertainties, we incorporated those two uncertainties into the Monte Carlo simulation and measured spatial accessibility to intensive ICU beds over 999 times. So here are the results of our analysis. So the map on this slide shows how the patterns of spatial accessibility change according to the different level of reliability. And let's assume that the 10 ICU beds per 100,000 people is sufficient. So the first map shows the spatial accessibility that can be obtained for 5% chance, and it resulted in 474 hexagons can have more than 10 ICU beds per 100,000 people. And however, the number of hexagons decreases as the reliability level increases. For instance, a 50% chance resulted in 368 hexagons, and a 95% chance resulted in 262 hexagons. And the last map indicates that the reliability of accessibility that so the last map indicates the reliability of accessibility that each hexagon has. So with the coefficient of variation, it explains the spatial accessibility at the peripheral region is less reliable than compared to the one in the center. And the second analysis we conducted is the hierarchical clustering. So we cluster the hexagons based on the stochastic distribution of the accessibility they have. And the map on the left-hand side illustrates that each hexagon has distinctive stochastic distribution. And the map on the right-hand side shows the clustering result. And the clustering was done by the hierarchical clustering, as you can see through the dendrogram here. And it resulted in four clusters from A through D. So the cluster A is the outermost hexagon in the study area, and it has low accessibility and low reliability. And cluster B has low reliability but moderate, low accessibility but moderate reliability. And cluster C is the city of Houston. It's the suburban of the city of Houston, and it has moderate accessibility and high reliability. And the last cluster is the downtown Houston. It has high accessibility and high reliability. So finally, we investigated the relationship of sufficient and reliable accessibility with the case fatality ratio of COVID-19. So given the importance of ICU beds for the COVID-19 patients. So the result showing in here is not statistically significant due to the limited number of samples, which are the 9 counties here. but I was able to find the trend. So the Austin County here and the Liberty County here has a higher case fatality ratio of COVID-19 compared to the entire Texas. And it has low accessibility and unreliable accessibility. On the other hand, the other counties have lower case fatality ratio of COVID-19, and it has relatively better accessibility and more reliable accessibility. And in addition, the Austin County and Liberty County is only have cluster A and B here. So through this study, I assessed the reliability of spatial accessibility and investigated the regions of robust accessibility under the uncertainty in supply and mobility. So as a result, the distance to downtown is proportional to sufficient and reliable accessibility. So this is because the most of hospitals in this area are located in downtown Houston. So if a hospital is running out of ICU bed, people who live in downtown Houston can access to the alternative hospitals. But this is not the case for the rural residents. And in addition, by investigating the relationship between the case fatality ratio and accessibility, this approach may address the spatial disparity of COVID-19. As a limitation of this study, it will be more interesting if this approach was applied to other cities where it has more dynamic spatial distributions. So given the greater Houston area is a monocentric, the clustering results are very similar to the concentric circles, and it resulted in less dynamic distributions. And in addition, this study only addressed the uncertainty in supply and mobility, but in the future, the uncertainty of demand, it is needed to be incorporated. So that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job. Yeah. Well, we have 7 minutes remaining for the last presentation, and the presenter's name is Spatial from Arizona State University. Unfortunately, Diana is here. Unfortunately, he's currently at the airport. He sent us a recorded video slideshow, a PowerPoint presentation by email. So Diana is going to share that with us.
I am. Let's give this a try. Here we go. Let's see. I'm going to share with audio. And then put it in.
So a researcher at the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience, which is a knowledge enterprise of the ASU. As I'm going to be talking about dashboards, it is critical that I define clearly what do I mean by dashboards. So dashboards are tools and a platform that allow visualization of data through various means, such as the charts, graphs, indicator meters, to present and highlight the most critical trends towards achieving one or several objectives. Dashboards essentially consolidate and communicate large set of diverse data from different organizations on a single screen, summarize various challenges. And from various literature, we find that big data and real-time dashboards have profound impacts on the shaping of smart cities and resiliency planning. So smart cities, as we know, they rely on data and technologies. And we are often seeing more so in these times of pandemic that resiliency planning is taking a cue from various COVID data dashboards. While the dashboards are a useful tool, there are several challenges theoretically and technically associated with the concept. Firstly, the focus, as Batty suggests, is more and more on producing data, and we have reached a stage of data saturation. And organizations are trying to see dashboards as scapegoats, and they are often appearing as infrastructure without a visible purpose. The question is, how do we use dashboards and decision support system? That has not been really examined, as Kitchen finds. So our question in this research that drives us to motivate this study How can dashboards be socially constructed to meet vital community issues and more so resilience issues? Our research goal primarily is to develop a local dashboard that address vital community resilience issues. And I highlight local dashboards and specialized dashboards as two critical terms here, because dashboards can often be the ones where several streams of data are shown and visualized. For example, from transport operations to environment and pollution status, Twitter feeds and whatnot. But we are looking at specialized information dashboards that tackle one issue, a single objective. And we're talking about local dashboards, not global or subnational dashboards, local dashboards that address local communities. So we name our dashboard the Arizona Economic Resilience Dashboard, that essentially aims to capture the overwhelming impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the economy in the state of Arizona, its counties, cities, and metropolitan statistical areas. We also try to find a set of guidelines for dashboard designers to implement data visualization tools while also addressing the various limitations and bias embedded within this practice of dashboarding. In developing the Economic Resilience Dashboard for Arizona, we harness several data sources from multiple organizations at the national, state, and local level. As you can see, we identify various sub-measures such as unemployment statistics, insurance claims, and these are defined through community consultations and stakeholder meetings. And our goal was also to build a dashboard that has live and dynamic data. So you can see the data update frequency varies from monthly to weekly. Whenever the data is available, the dashboard in real time updates to the current data. This slide outlines the methodology to develop the dashboard. Firstly, the architecture starts with the data collection engine, and we have built a data exchange hub, which I'll explain in the next slide, that basically draws data from all these different databases populate in our own in-house open source system. And those data sets are then standardized, cleaned, and joined and through blending techniques. And finally, we use the platform of Tableau to visualize those data sets and build the dashboard that then goes into our server. This is the data exchange hub that we have built. I just mentioned that on GeoNode platform. So GeoNode is an open source framework to really bring together various APIs and spatial layers into one place on a standardized, consistent format, which can be then mapped and visualized at various scales. So as you can see, this platform that we have built has several data layers from environment to economy to climate, and we have used all those different layers to create the maps. We have several users across our network, and you can see all of these different layers have been injected into the dashboard that I will show in the next slide. But basically, it is very important that we have this consistent data acquisition format, and this module that we have built is completely open source, open access. So that means the researchers like us not just create data sets from different agencies, but also provide them in open access, standardized global formats for them to be used and built upon. So from the data exchange hub, where we house all the layers, now I unveil the Economic Resilience Dashboard, which is basically a collection of all the different maps in a simple and accessible format for people to then start thinking about the challenges that we're facing on the economy. And you can see the Economic Resilience Dashboard. We provide an overview of what we're trying to achieve through this dashboard, who are the really targeted audience. But then we go on outlining those different indicators and sections. For example, we start with the unemployment rate, and you can see we use the maps and charts, and these are all dynamic and interactive. For example, if I want to change to a different county, I can do that, and the visualization would then quickly adapt to the environment to provide us with an updated image. And so we can also look at, the changed year. For example, it was 2020 when the pandemic, and you can see how the unemployment rate went up. And so we can really ask several kinds of questions. And here's a timeline slider. We can go back to another time, and really the map would then suddenly change and highlight what it was then. For example, April 2020, and you can see suddenly, boom, the unemployment rate was really booming at that time, just after the pandemic hit. And so the users a lot of flexibility when navigating this data. And so then we have county level, metropolitan statistical area, but also cities. We are also looking at the 97 cities in the Arizona, and that has a number of other metrics as well, not just unemployment rate, but we are looking at several other factors that people might be interested in. And we also looked at initial unemployment incidence claims, because those are the of how many people are really feeling the burnout of the pandemic. And again, we really provide a time series analysis. It's not just a spatial analysis, but a temporal analysis. And people can change and examine how the pattern has evolved over the time. And this is another example of a tailor-made dashboard where we are trying to visualize the impact across education, race, ethnicity groups, and industry of this pandemic. And if I can change this, for example, from Arizona to Maricopa County, you can see the dashboard would suddenly change and it will highlight data for that specific county. And this has a lot of potential to really understand where and who and how much has been impacted by the pandemic. And that can also go to a lot of strategic and policy formulation side. Also look at the employment by industry and wage pattern to really understand where, in which industries the impact has been significant. And here you can see here, for example, you can clearly see leisure and hospitality has been really hit hard. And we change up to, for example, May, and then you'd suddenly see, whoa, how many jobs have been lost? More than 100,000 jobs have been lost. And so then the government's data, the state and local agencies can then, help allure the local businesses and economy. And so incentivizing, creating new packages targeted through data-driven approach. We've also looked at the earnings and wages, and also we brought together the data from the Census Household Pulse Survey that the Census Bureau does. And you can see we have tracked what is the likelihood of eviction, and we provide the signages here. These are the accessible symbols. As I was talking, that our dashboard is very, very accessible. So we provide definitions wherever you use some keywords or terms. We provide these kind of tools to really make them accessible. And also the tooltip. This is the tooltip. Whenever you hover over these charts, it provides the background data, which is really important when you are trying to present data to an audience who might not be that data literate, And we also map the relief fund allocations of the CARES Act across the counties and cities here. And overall, you see this is a dashboard which is technically called sprawling dashboard. This is not a single page dashboard, not a single view dashboard, but multiple view sprawling page dashboard. And we have a strong emphasis on co-designing approach, on building these dashboards and data hubs. It's really essential that we focus on community engagement, stakeholder engagement, and we rigorous testing of these tools is absolutely critical to bring up these user interfaces. And we have strong engagements, UCL and UNSW Sydney, and you can see all of these screens where we bring in stakeholders and really actively test our platforms before we open up for public consumption. Our study highlights that specialized information dashboards are much more powerful than generic dashboards because they tackle one issue and address that holistically rather than trying to identify so many issues with a lot of deluge of data that is often complex to decipher. And local dashboards have potential for greater impact on local communities. We also emphasize that dashboards must also provide open data to communities, to researchers, to build upon the existing work. It cannot be a black box where you only provide but do not provide access to data. And hence our data exchange hub is a very unique initiative. And finally, dashboards should not be treated as trending technology. They must provide a blueprint to how they can address rapidly evolving issues of local and global community concern. Thank you for your attention, and any questions you have, please route them to my email here. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Jen. I also
was really stressful.
Yeah, whether or not it will work. And I also want to thank Tom McKeown for his help. Really, without his help, keeping time, we'll not be able to finish all the presentations. Yeah. And thank you, everyone, for your participation, for staying here. I know some people have to leave a little bit earlier. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank all the presenters for your brilliant job. Really, very well done. Very inspiring. Personally, I enjoy it. I want to invite everyone to join me and thank all the presenters for their presentation.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you all very much.